is the importance of multiple perspectives. We talk about wanting to have every voice in the room. Well, every voice includes youngers and olders. It includes fresh eyes and wise eyes. And I've had an observation.
I first experienced appreciative inquiry in a course I was taking for an organizational psychology master's program. And I don't remember the actual title of the course, but it was basically summed up as participative action review or research, participative action research versus appreciative inquiry. In the first 2 weeks, we spent reading about how to solve problems. And that's what I knew in organizations. Find a problem, fix the problem, keep it from coming back. And the next, I think week 3 or so, we started to read some what seemed to be really fluffy stuff. And we're talking about plants growing in directions of sunlight and helio. I had no idea what was going on, but I was captivated by it. So I kept reading, and it started to make sense. Well, of course, why would you want to manage resistance? Why wouldn't you want to look where people were at their best? Why don't you want to honor the history of an organization? And those things kind of made sense, but all of my training had been on fixing problems. So I was in the middle of doing some research and doing interviews with chief information officers from a large collection of law firms. And one of the questions I would ask are, what are some of the challenges that your training department has? And I would get a fairly in-depth response. And so I decided in the middle of doing the interviews to change that last question. And I said, so tell me about the ideal learning department for you. What might that look like? What skills might they have? And I was just amazed at the depth and the level of the answers. And so it gave me a lot of follow-ups to ask. And simply by looking at the length of response in the transcript from the challenges question was about this big. The ideal situation question was about this big. I just had so much better data. So one of the things that has really struck me about AI is the results were better. It was more fun. People left more engaged in the conversation, and every single CIO where I asked the question, what's the ideal state, said, hey, feel free to follow up with me. Let me know if I can help. If you guys develop a product or service related to this, please let me know. And that was how I was introduced to AI. And another big part of appreciative inquiry for me is I really didn't know what it was. So I remember after that first course in the first reading, having a very impactful conversation with someone who had a lot more experience in appreciative inquiry. And we had this long car ride home back from Vermont. And sometimes talking to someone with more experience, someone who's done the appreciative inquiry work a lot more, was really impactful for me, and it helped me learn. And the best part about those conversations is it went both ways. I felt like she was learning from me, I was learning from her, and so AI is really going to stay a part of my life for a long time.
Finding AI is almost like finding Neverland. And I say that because my introduction to appreciative inquiry was with one of the major telecommunications companies. And what had happened was, because I was teaching courses for women leaders, I was asked to come in and work on the problem of men and women working together, and particularly around sexual harassment. And of course that's a legal issue. It is also an issue that must be addressed, and it is not anything that was part of my interest, because I wanted to talk about the good relationships that men and women had, but I kind of felt like a voice in the wilderness because people were focused on the problem. And the truth of the matter is that the problem is more evident to us, and in certain ways the problem is sexy. We can sort of get our hands on that. So I was going to national training labs with my good friend Jane Watkins, and she was president of NTL at that time, and I met Dave Cooperrider. And so I did what I would recommend to people new to appreciative inquiry. I hired him, and I hired him so that I could in fact be an apprentice. And I believe that the best way to learn appreciative inquiry is practice and theory, but how do you, rather than theory and practice, but how do you do that in a useful way to your client system? Well, we did it with an experienced person and a less experienced person, and it turned out to be a wonderful experience on multiple levels. To study the relationships that work and to understand what is it that's working is very different than studying what doesn't work. It's almost as if when you study what doesn't work, it sort of expands, and you find it's like it's got shoots that come off of unanticipated consequences. But when you study what does work, you can say, why don't we do more of that?
For me, I found appreciative inquiry through Marge Schiller because she wanted me to participate in a project called GAP, which was Girls About Political Participation. And in Marge's very grand scheme thinking way, she said, Charlotte, we are going to find a bunch of girls, young girls, and we're going to introduce them to congresswomen and people from the Senate and stuff like this. And I was blown away. To me, I was 17 or 16, and Marge was talking about these people that seemed like celebrities to me. They make things happen in the world, and I was definitely not ready for that. I was thinking that it was kind of a blowaway dream, something you think about, but it's not going to happen. And then she taught me all of these things that really helped. And it was just thinking about how things could happen. It was just thinking about making things happen besides what couldn't happen. So when I was thinking about these people as untouchables and thinking that I would never get to meet them, I would never be on their level, Marge was thinking, these are just people, and we're going to introduce people to people, and it's going to work. It's going to be great. So that's how I got introduced to appreciative inquiry. I really liked it.
As all good conversations go, we talked and laughed and learned far longer than our 10-minute time allotment. However, what we hope you take away from our appreciative inquiry experiences is that no one is too young or too old to teach you something great. Appreciative inquiry enables us to think bigger and better, and all ages deserve a seat at the table where good conversation happens.
I remember you talking about mentorship.
Yeah.
You didn't really like that word, and I asked you why. And you told me that it puts people on a different level. And your approach to conversations at multiple generations is more on the peer level. And that was an eye-opener for me, because I think as people in an organization who are maybe younger asking for advice, I would typically take that role of, oh, I have a little bit more experience, let me share that. But by shifting it a bit and taking more of a peer-to-peer, eye-to-eye, I think I learned a lot more and got more out of the conversation. I remember hearing that about your mentorship distance.
Learning partnerships.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.